Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive, and Happy New Year's, Happy Holidays to everybody. We didn't have our episode last week. It fell on Christmas, and things got a little too hectic to fit that in, so we apologize about that, but welcome back. Unfortunately, we didn't get to discuss the triumphant victory over the Lions. Instead, we're back here to discuss a very, very brutal loss to the Browns. And so we unfortunately shorted you guys what would have been a fun episode in exchange for what might be a little bit more of a brutal episode. But that's the way things go. Any of you Steelers fans out there know that this team is just all over the place, up and down. The roller coaster ride has been real this season, and our podcast is a reflection of that. Before we get started, Joe, how's everything in your world?
Doing well. How about you?
I can't complain. It finally got cold here after it was like 75 degrees during Christmas and in the winter. It was very strange. So I'm actually, some people, especially in Pittsburgh, that are getting dumped on with snow right now probably won't like me for this, but I'm actually happy that it's cooled off. I like my seasons, and 75-degree Christmas was not my favorite. So the three topics we're going to discuss today: the Cleveland Browns, obviously recapping that disaster of a game, the Steelers losing 13-6, their lowest offensive output of the season. I think the second lowest was the Bills, they scored 7 points. So we'll talk about that. Then we're going to go and, of course, preview the Ravens game coming up on Sunday Night Football. That is a win or go home, a win and in, winner take all, whatever you want to call it. That's what it is. All the marbles in that game. We'll discuss that, the injury reports, and more. And finally, we will talk about what is this team. It's been so difficult to get kind of a handle on what this team actually is, and I think this week might tell us a lot about that, but we're going to do our best to decipher that in the meantime for you guys. And finally, we'll wrap things up with a viewer question. That can be, if you want to have your question answered, that can be done at 412-254-3145. Just give us a call. You can leave a voicemail or a text. Just tell us your name, where you're from, and a brief question, and we'll answer that on a future episode. All right, diving into the Browns game. Like I said, 13-6. Joe, I'll give you the first topic here. Where do you want to start?
I think the biggest thing is that just how stagnant the offense was. You didn't have DK Metcalf, and you also didn't have Calvin Austin the third, so you're really shorthanded at receiver, which led to Scotty Miller getting 7 targets, Marquez Valdes-Scantling getting 9 targets. Scotty Miller was barely playing at all for most of the season. Marquez Valdes-Scantling was a free agent for a lot of the season, and now in a must-win game, they're your two most targeted players. And it kind of speaks to how the Steelers, not just this year, haven't really prepared for if something happens to their top receiver and their top receiving threat. You don't have, somebody that you can rely on to really truly step up. Even if Calvin Austin was healthy, he's been very up and down this season. And so I think that was the biggest takeaway. And that's, the biggest worry heading into this week as well. Marcus Valdes-Scantling, you cannot rely on him to be, your go-to receiver. We saw that late. And I know Arthur Smith says, oh, his man coverage was a good look, but throwing to Marquez Valdes-Scantling with a game on the line in man coverage is not the same as throwing to DK Metcalf with a game on the line in man coverage. So just really the lack of talent, the lack of weapons stood out. And I also thought, you didn't use Jaylen Warren enough. Jaylen Warren had 12 carries for 64 yards. I thought they should have, leaned on him a little bit more to get the run game going, because it was clear as day very early that the passing attack wasn't going to work, especially when Darnell Washington, he had those 2 early receptions. Then he left, he broke his arm. So, not not getting anything there. So it was frustrating. Kenneth Gainwell had been this team's leading receiver. He was used more in their game plan to chip Myles Garrett, and was kind of going out of the backfield late. He only got 4 targets, only had 12 receiving yards. So it was really just the lack of weapons stood out. And I think that's really a big, big problem for this team right now. We saw it last year when George Pickens was hurt. They didn't really have somebody reliable to step up, and that kind of sparked their poor end of season run. And the same thing might happen here, although to a smaller degree, but a much more important degree with the playoffs on the line without DK Metcalf.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you mentioned with Myles Garrett kind of aligning out wide and his wide 9 being way out. Anyone who watched the game, it was obvious. He looked like he was rushing from like a corner position almost. And that's because he was very wide, and that was intentional. Browns defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz today talked about, hey, Myles Garrett, it's not that the Steelers were so focused on him that they weren't more focused on his sack record than winning the game. Like, that's a ridiculous narrative. But here's exactly how Garrett did impact that, and it was taking away their top receiver. And, Kenneth Gainwell has been that for the Steelers, and especially with DK Metcalf, Calvin Austin III, and Darnell Washington later out for the game. Kenneth Gainwell being held to, 3 receptions for 12 yards. All of those targets, I think he had 4 total targets. All of those were low quality, kind of like panic check down type of situations for Gainwell. And so really he made almost no impact. I'd have to look at how this game stacked up for all of his other games, but only 38 scrimmage yards for a player that's knocking on the door of 1,000. This was one of his lower production games, and in a game when you don't have DK Metcalf, Calvin Austin III, and for most of the game, Darnell Washington, that is exactly how we ended up with 6 points for the Steelers. Joe, what do you take bigger exception to? The 3 straight targets to Valdez-Scantling with the game on the line, the fact that when it was 3rd and 4th and 1, they decided to go to the Scotty Miller throw instead of doing their Spartan formation, which has worked all season. I mean, there's a lot of gripes that I've seen fans have and that I've had, and I want to know what you think. What is your biggest gripe there?
Yeah, I mean, I think they should have ran the ball in 4th and 1, but if they were going to throw a shot down the sideline to Scotty Miller is not what I've drawn up in that situation. So, I mean, I think the Valdez-Scantling, that sequence kind of stands out more because of the circumstance they were in. But if you look at the the Scotty Miller play, you're in a situation where you just got a turnover, you have some momentum, you can kind of maybe shift the game more in your favor, and they didn't do that because of the play call. Arthur Smith said, "Oh, we want to take a shot," didn't work out, but maybe that's not the spot to take a shot there. That's where you pick up a first down and just try to build something with, not having a lot of your healthy weapons available. So for me, I think that was the bigger issue just because of, how it happened. The Valdez-Scantling play, you needed that to get back in the game, but they might not have been in that situation had they, scripted that 4th down play better and not just thrown a deep ball to Scotty Miller and maybe got something and picked up yardage. And then, maybe your offense has a little bit of momentum. I mean, I didn't like the 3 straight throws to Valdez-Scantling. I thought, maybe more so on Aaron Rodgers. He wasn't really going through his progressions. He just saw the man coverage, and he has a lot of trust in Valdez-Scantling from the time in Green Bay, but he's just not that receiver anymore. But I think in the totality of the game, the 4th and 1 play to Miller was probably the bigger mishap, just because of how it could have affected the rest of that drive, how it could have affected the rest of the game if the offense maybe found some momentum and got on the board a little bit earlier there and capitalized off the big Jack Sawyer turnover.
And that's another situation. The 3 straight to Valdez-Scantling is another situation Jim Schwartz talked about today during his coordinator press conference with the Browns. They basically schemed it up that way. The Steelers hadn't thrown at Denzel Ward all night all day, and they ended up doing it 3 straight times. And that was kind of an intentional thing by the Browns to give them that look, to kind of bait them into that situation because they like that matchup. They trust Denzel Ward on Valdez-Scantling, as they should. And, so at a certain point, you do have to tip your cap to the Browns for a well-executed plan and making the plays in one-on-one situations. But, yeah, at the same time, I mean, if you're going to throw the fade, you can't really go through your progression. And so it's one of those situations where, if Rodgers liked the matchup, which I don't know why he would, but if he liked the matchup, then you can't really look through and say, oh, well, Gainwell came open there. That's not how that typically works. So I know it's an unfortunate thing, and there's all those freeze frames of Gainwell being open, and could he have bought time? I mean, in hindsight, obviously the answer is yes, but if you're going to throw that fade, you can't really you can't think about it. You have to just throw it. Even Ben Roethlisberger, who initially kind of criticized it, he said after looking back through the film, that's just kind of how those situations worked. And especially on the final play, that's kind of what they had to do. Maybe more of a critique on the first 2 where Valdez-Scantling didn't even really run the right route. And, how about we didn't even talk about, but Roman Wilson only had, 9 snaps in this game? What the heck is going on there? Especially, you talk about why Wilson isn't playing, and kind of the thesis is that Rodgers doesn't trust him, and maybe he wasn't running right routes or whatever it might be. He wasn't picking up on hand signals. And of course, what do you have is Valdez-Scantling running incorrect routes, having miscommunications in the final moments of the game. And so, what are we really doing here in terms of playing these veterans who definitely don't have as much talent and keeping these younger guys like Roman Wilson off the field? I thought that was frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we kind of talked about during this winning streak that the veterans were the guys providing stability. You had Thielen against the Lions with a few big first downs. Valdez-Scantling didn't do much in that game, but he had the touchdown against the Dolphins. And, maybe we're like, oh, maybe this is why they're turning a corner a little bit. Rodgers has guys that you can trust. And then they're the ones who are not Thielen, but Valdez-Scantling there, then messing up with the game on the line. That's just really, you really can't have that happen.
Yeah, and there were missed opportunities. Tomlin called out the Nick Herbig, dropped what probably would have been a pick six. I think, if you look at Jack Sawyer's interception, he probably didn't need to cut that thing back inside. Maybe could have picked up some extra yards, which, maybe could have led to a scoring, a touchdown. Or so there was opportunities throughout the game. And, Shedeur Sanders got Cleveland 10 points early. The defense kind of shot themselves in the foot with some bad play early, and that was unfortunately all the Browns needed to protect that lead the rest of the game. By, after the first two drives, the Browns had enough points to secure victory, which tells you all you need to know about the offense. Yeah, Pat Freiermuth's the other head scratcher. They're not using Roman Wilson. They're not even putting him on the field. That's one conversation we already had. But Pat Freiermuth, they're putting him on the field a fair, at least a little bit more, but they're just not using him. And they did when it came to crunch time. And sure enough, they marched right down the field and got into a position where they maybe could have tied up the game. He ended up having 3 receptions for 63 yards. And this is kind of a microcosm of the whole season for him, because he hasn't, other than, what was it, the first Bengals game where they lost? Like, he hasn't really had a game where they feature him in any meaningful way. And it's become very apparent that he's kind of an afterthought on offense. Now, could that change with Darnell Washington out? You would hope so. You would hope that this is a Freiermuth week, but the fact that they haven't used him all year, it's hard to believe in that. But we'll see. Any thoughts on that before we move on to the Ravens portion here?
Yeah, it's just tough to see that happening because Washington went down in the first quarter. And again, it wasn't until the final drive where they actually really started to feature Freiermuth. So you knew Washington was out that game. Why wouldn't you feature Freiermuth earlier? So I have a tough. I mean, I hope they do. He's made plays when he's gotten the ball, but I have a tough time seeing them really turn to Freiermuth as a featured receiver this week.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think a good way to transition this to the Ravens portion is talking about the lack of Darnell Washington and the Spartan formation. We talked about that earlier. They ended up throwing to Scotty Miller on 4th and 1, and a big reason why they did that is because they went out, originally lined up in Spartan formation, which is the tush push, their name for the tush push play, in case you weren't aware. And they actually called a timeout and ended up with that Scotty Miller play after Jonnu Smith originally lined up where Darnell Washington would normally be. And so, is this a situation where they feel like they can't do the tush push anymore because Darnell Washington isn't there? I think Arthur Smith might have said something about that today, kind of hinting at like, we might have some wrinkles, but I'm not going to tell you what they are, kind of thing. I guess, is that going to be Jonnu Smith back there? I don't know who else they're going to put back there.
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. Jonnu Smith would make some sense. I mean, they've ran a bunch of variations often, and Jonnu Smith's had a bunch of carries, so maybe there's, some wrinkle that they can throw in if he's out there. But yeah, that would be my guess for who's out there. But I guess we'll see if they have to end up running it on Sunday.
I mean, a big part of the Steelers' success over the 3-game win streak was the fact that they were being aggressive on 3rd and 4th and short, and a lot of the success there had to do with their use of the Spartan. And we've seen the Spartan set up things like the Yazoo, which is the Gainwell fake Spartan where he goes around the end. They had success with that. They had Connor Hayward's interesting play where they motioned him into Spartan last second, and then he ended up taking it around the end for, I think, 26 yards. Was it 26? Yeah, 29 yards. So, the Spartan has set up a lot of positive things for the offense in terms of moving the chains first and foremost, but also creating explosive plays with these fakes. It's really hard to deal with as a defense that's trying to sell out to stop, the easy conversion on 4th and 1 and stuff. So, I mean, to me, they have to run. They're going to be put in situations where the Spartan would be run, and to me, they have to figure out a way to get that going against the Ravens.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's how you win these games is you take advantage of those short-yardage situations. And in these big games in the past, that's where the Steelers have faltered. So that definitely has to be a focus this week. I mean, they've shown their hand a lot of times with some of the trickeration, but maybe we see a little bit more of that. But either way, they have to find a way to get a yard when they need to get a yard.
Both the Steelers and Ravens in this important win and in game are dealing with injuries to significant players. In fact, to their highest paid players, respectively, on each roster. Lamar Jackson did not play last week with a back injury, suffered the week prior. He looks like he's tracking to play. It sounds like most of the insiders are reporting he will play. He practiced fully on Wednesday. John Harbaugh said, he's optimistic that he will play. All signs point to Lamar playing. However, is he going to be fully effective? Most likely not, but he's still Lamar Jackson. The Steelers, on the other hand, TJ Watt, still to be determined. He was limited in practice on Wednesday. Mike Tomlin laid out the conditions for Watt's return and said, we need a full week of practice because this isn't like a normal injury. Now, he did say that last week before it was a dire situation, and so does that change the calculus? You'd hope not, because, you don't want to put a guy out there that has legitimate health concerns, but TJ Watt sounds more up in the air, though Terrell Austin today did make a pretty strong hint saying, what was the exact quote? Do you know?
It'd be great. He said it's great to have him back. I'll pull up the full thing. He goes, it'll be great to have him back. In what capacity, we won't know until Sunday, but it'll be great to have him back.
So it sounds like they're hinting at potentially like a rotational, kind of like maybe a key third down role for him. So it sounds like we might not have a full complement of Watt, which is fine. The Steelers have nice depth there. Herbig was back, and Highsmith's been a monster lately. Sawyer has played admirably for a rookie, and I think there's stuff to like about his game, and so I think that's an okay situation. It's great to have Watt back in the fold at all, and certainly if the playoffs happen at that point, you'd expect Watt to be back full tilt. So some positive stuff there. But Joe, what else on the Wednesday injury reports for both teams?
Yeah, so for the Steelers, Calvin Austin, Isaac Seumalo, TJ Watt, Malik Harrison, James Pierre, and Brandon Eccles were all limited. The good news is Mike Tomlin kind of expressed confidence in Austin, Seumalo, Pierre, all returning. Which I think getting Pierre and Eccles back would be huge because then that allows you to move Jalen Ramsey back to free safety. We saw, I mean, Kyle Duggar misplayed the deep ball late. I like Ramsey in that safety role, and I think both Eccles and Pierre have done a great job in their respective roles this season. If you get Calvin Austin back, obviously, then that gives you another receiving option without DK Metcalf. So would be super important there. And then Aaron Rodgers, Ben Skoranek, and Christian Kuntz were all full participants on Wednesday. All should be good to go. For Baltimore, Lamar Jackson, as we talked about, was full. Rashad Bateman did not practice with an illness. Kyle Van Noy didn't practice the quad. DeAndre Hopkins is out due to rest. And then offensive lineman Andrew Voorhees, Taven Bryan, defensive lineman, Ronnie Stanley, Roquan Smith, Patrick Ricard, and Charlie Kohler were all limited. Kohler's played a bigger role for Baltimore in recent weeks, but it doesn't seem like there's any real concern for those guys heading into Sunday. I mean, I think Smith should play, Voorhees should play, Stanley should play. Um, but I mean, we'll see the rest of this week. But yeah, I mean, Jackson's obviously the big name there, but him practicing in full yesterday, a good sign. But as you said, could he be limited? He hurt his back, it was a back contusion that he sustained on like a scramble play. He landed awkwardly. If the Steelers kind of are able to get pressure and bring him down, is that going to, re-aggravate the injury? Is it going to limit how much he can do with his legs? So a factor there, regardless if he plays, but it does seem like he will play. And that is obviously great news for Baltimore. They don't have to roll out Tyler Huntley in a must-win game. But I mean, I think all eyes are going to be on Derrick Henry after he had 36 carries, one of the best games of his career against the Packers to put the Ravens in this spot. He ran well against the Steelers the first time around, and I think stopping him is going to be the key to the game, regardless of Jackson likely being available.
Yeah, it's been a topic of discussion in the Steelers world this week, being asked, would you rather play Huntley at full health or Jackson at partial health? And I don't know how this is even a question, but, you know, I think we'd probably both agree that you'd rather play Huntley in that situation, though you have to give him his credit. He completed 16 of 20 against the Packers in a must-win game, only for 107 yards and a touchdown, but he didn't make the critical error. 0 interceptions. He only took 1 sack. He did what a backup quarterback needs to do, and really they just relied on that Derrick Henry ground and pound game, 216 yards, 4 touchdowns. My goodness. I mean, Derrick Henry, you want to talk about something that is terrifying, should be terrifying to Steelers fans. It's the fact that Henry's coming to town red hot, and last year ended the way it did, where Henry ran all over them. So that is, obviously very concerning. But yeah, Lamar Jackson isn't going to, I don't think he will be his full self. He hasn't been his full self for much of the season with other injuries. You add on top of it the back contusion, which probably is not fully healed. And like you said, if you get a good hit on him, I mean, I don't know if we're going to see a ton of scrambling from him. The last time these two teams matched up, it was kind of the first time Jackson was showing signs of the scramble stuff that he's known for. It looked like that was coming back finally. And I don't know what this most recent injury did to that. I would guess probably sets it back further, but we'll have to wait and see. I think that there's like an overarching theme, and we talked about, before the season, leading up to the season, the Steelers talked about that they formulated their secondary to defend against the Bengals, and they formulated their defensive line to defend against the Ravens' rush attack, and I guess the Browns to a lesser extent probably as well, but they did a lot of changes on defense to match up with these two teams. Unfortunately, they split games with the Bengals and the Browns. Are they going to be able to prove their offseason philosophy with a win against the Ravens? And, obviously that having to include shutting down the run first and foremost.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing too is in that first matchup, they didn't have Derek Harmon, and he has been good against the run this year. I mean, Mike Tomlin suggests about it and make fun of all the talk about how Derek Harmon's the cure to the Steelers' run game woes, but I mean, I think he is a much better option there against the run. I mean, we saw why Black against the Ravens got blown off the ball a few times in that first matchup. So I think having Harmon there will help solidify the run game. But yeah, I mean, Baltimore knows that they want to establish a run. The Steelers have been a team that has allowed teams to run on them this season. So I think it's really going to be mano a mano if the Steelers, they talk the talk. Now we have to see if they can walk the walk and really slow down this run game in a must-win critical situation.
If the Steelers do win this game, what's going to be the story on offense?
I think it's going to be a lot of Kenneth Gainwell, and maybe if Calvin Austin returns, maybe you got a shot play to Calvin Austin, or I think there needs to be one explosive in there to help move the ball downfield. I go back to what was this 2022? It was Kenny Pickett's rookie year. They had the shot play on the Sunday night game against Baltimore to Steven Sims that set up the Najee Harris game-winning touchdown. So it could be somebody just completely out of the blue, but I think you're going to need at least one one explosive or double explosive through the air. That kind of sets this offense up and gives them some momentum and gives them some life. So whether that's to Calvin Austin, whether it's to Scotty Miller, heck, maybe Roman Wilson finally gets his opportunity, or it could be Valdez Scantling. Who knows? But I think it's going to be Kenneth Gainwell does what he's done for the majority of this season. The Ravens pass rush isn't all that fearsome. You're not going to need him to chip and stay back as you did against Myles Garrett. So I think there's going to be opportunities for Gainwell to make plays, and I think you can get one double explosive out of one of your receivers. You have speed there to kind of set this offense up, and I think that will be kind of the story of the offense if they are able to pull out the win.
Yeah, I agree that the Ravens pass rush isn't as scary to the point where you're going to need to chip, but could they? I think that they could do a copycat situation and align some whoever their quickest pass rusher is, align them out wide 9 and make the Steelers deal with that, because that is tough for any offensive tackle to deal with if they don't have help. It's like if you saw where Garrett was aligning, man, he had all the space in the world to either push outside, or maybe fake outside and then do a bull rush or cut back inside. I mean, he had all of the space in the world, and so that's why the chip was necessary. And so, I could see a situation where the Ravens try to do some of that if they reach the same conclusion that, wow, look at that Steelers offense, if without DK and without Darnell, if you're able to take Gainwell out of the game. And the Steelers obviously need to come up with a better plan to mitigate that themselves, do a little self-scouting, but that could be an interesting chess match between the two teams that I could see happening. In terms of who's going to need to have a good game, I think Calvin Austin III seems like it seems like he hinted at potentially playing. I mean, at first he kind of sounded uncertain, saying, I can't remember the exact quote, but basically saying that these kinds of injuries are tricky because they can just kind of flare back up, and the soft tissue stuff. He had a hamstring, but at the same time, I think he said something along the lines of, I hope they do stay in man coverage, and basically talked about being excited to be the number one receiver in the Steelers offense. And so that tells me that he is hoping to play. Mike Tomlin did say that there was optimism there. So I think that Calvin Austin III needs to have a big game. Absolutely. He hasn't had a great year. I thought that he would probably have a little bit better year than he is having, especially with Roman Wilson barely playing. But this is the time, and I think we saw some of that last year when George Pickens was out. Calvin Austin III had some pretty decent games as the top guy, and so hopefully we see some of that this year as well. So that's going to be my key there. A prediction, Joe. I'll give you the first. What do you think's going to happen? Win, loss, score, and what's the Vegas thing right now?
The Ravens are favored by, or at least the opening line are favored by 3.5 points. I believe that is still the current line. So not a lot of faith in the Steelers at home. I really have no good grasp on this game. I think there's going to be some way, somehow, the Steelers pull it out. I'm going to go 24-21 Steelers. I mean, I think the large majority of the national media is on Baltimore, but I think there's going to be some way that Aaron Rodgers pulls it out and gets to the playoffs, maybe one last time. I don't know. I mean, they beat the Ravens once on the road. They can do it again at home. I mean, even without Metcalf. Well, we'll see, because I mean the offense looked so terrible. I would like to think that they're going to come out and find a solution this week. So that's kind of where I'm basing this at. But I also wouldn't be surprised if things did not go the Steelers' way either. But in my final prediction, I think I'd have to go Steelers 24, Ravens 21.
I think I'm going to have to play the bad guy here, and something in my gut's telling me this isn't going to go the Steelers' way. Last time the Steelers and Ravens played, a lot of people will forget, the Steelers had 34 rushing yards. Ouch, and 17 carries. That can't happen again in this game, no matter which way you slice it, because the passing game is as hampered as it is right now. I think back to last year, George Pickens, when he was out, the offense went anemic for multiple weeks and never really recovered, even when he came back at slightly less than 100%. And I'm a little worried that not having DK Metcalf, it's just too easy for opposing defensive coordinators to shut things down. The only wild card is, do the Steelers whip out some kind of fake punt, or do they maybe get a pick six or a big sack fumble from Nick Herbig or TJ Watt? Maybe it gets recovered by Peyton Wilson and goes into the end zone. Like, that's the only scenario, unfortunately, in my mind right now, that I see the Steelers winning, is some kind of special teams or defensive touchdown has to be involved. If I had to pick a score, I don't see the Steelers scoring over 14 or 17. So maybe I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say the Ravens win 20-17 with another disappointing end to a season. Joe, where would this stack up over the last few in terms of disappointments?
See, that's an interesting question, because I think last season they started off so much, like they were a strong, they were 10-3, I think, at one point, and there was legitimate Super Bowl discussion, and then you collapse at the end of the season. So I, like, in terms of last year. I think 2020 was the most disappointing season the way that ended, especially with the loss to the Browns. I would put this, at least you made the playoffs last year. I would put this as the second most disappointing season in the last, what, 5, 6 years then. Um, I think even though there was still some trepidation with this team before the season, they did start off strong. But given all of the moves they made this offseason to, revamp their team and claim that they were getting serious about competing, and you bring in Rodgers, you trade for Jalen Ramsey, and then to not make the playoffs, I think would be a pretty big disappointment, and I think it will lead to another very long off season.
Yeah, agreed. And, are we looking back in a couple of days here at the DK Metcalf fan incident? Is that picture going to define the entire Steelers 2025 season? I think there's a pretty good chance that happens in my estimation, with me having them lose. That will be the big thing is, well, DK Metcalf's actions doomed the team, and there's going to be storylines about, well, George Pickens was a pain in the butt, but he never did that. You're already hearing some of that. Certainly if the Steelers end up missing the playoffs, that will be a big topic of discussion. And the DK Metcalf voided guarantees angle. I think that, the Steelers have reportedly told him that they're not going to void them, but my understanding at least is that there's not some kind of deadline to void those or not, and so the Steelers would still have the option to do that. Now, it would set a weird precedent, especially if they've already assured him that they're committed long term, and that would involve them pretty much having to move on this offseason, which I don't see happening, because I think $25 million of his full guarantees are this upcoming year's salary, and then he has some injury guarantees after that, and so really the only way to save big is to cut him this next offseason, but there'd still be some considerable dead money, and I don't think that the Steelers are going to do that, especially if they're looking to either retain Aaron Rodgers, which we'll talk about potentially in a second, or if they draft a quarterback. You don't want to clean house of any viable weapons, which has been an issue for the Steelers for a while anyways. So, like you said, a lot of troubling times ahead if the Steelers lose. I think it just depends if you asked me after, say, the Buffalo Bills loss, I would say, this wasn't that disappointing of a season. If you told me the outcome of it all came down to the final game and they had a chance and whatever, I guess it depends if they get blown out by the Ravens or not. A loss is a loss. It's still bad no matter which way you cut it, but a blowout would certainly feel worse, especially if that comes with a ton of rushing yards involved. That's going to feel awful. But if you ask me, like now or after the Lions game, this is, I was starting to talk myself into, all right, this team's turning things around for the playoffs and the AFC's wide open. What can this team do? I think that's a good question, Joe. What can this team do if they win? Is this a one and done team?
I don't love that. I think they're slated to play the Texans in the first round. That Houston defense is incredible. That scares me a little bit. You go back though to, if they win this game, you're getting DK Metcalf back. You have Aaron Rodgers motivated towards the end of his career, and as you said, the AFC is wide open. So do you get a little bit of a motivating factor there? Houston doesn't necessarily scare me offensively. Nico Collins is great, but they don't have much of a run game. CJ Stroud is a solid quarterback. I think they could still find a way to win that game. And then from there, I think, who knows? It's wide open from there. So ultimately, I think they're probably going to go one and done. But if they win this game, I don't know. It's I think it's really anything could happen. I think one and done's the most likely scenario, but I also I wouldn't rule out this team, maybe winning a game or two and really surprising some people.
Yeah, I think I have the similar thinking. Despite me thinking they're going to lose this week, if they find a way to win, then you've won 4 of the last 5. You're getting DK Metcalf back. The team health will be in a relatively good spot. The big thing in my head is, man, losing Darnell Washington. That might be the bigger loss to me than anything, just because of how important he was in multiple different ways. And I'm going to go ahead and say they can win one. I don't know if they can win multiple games there. Hosting a playoff game, maybe some Acrisure Stadium magic comes into play. I don't know, but Tomlin's future. That's the other topic here. It seems to be that I don't know. Everyone wants to make it a storyline because another disappointing loss against the Browns, and I think they're now what 1-4, or they're 0-5. What's the stat against teams that are like way below 500 or something?
I
There
think
was
4-1 in their last 5 games, dating back to 2020, I believe it was.
Yeah, so they're just awful against these bottom dweller teams, and so it was a signature Mike Tomlin loss at the worst possible moment of the season. And so I get why the narrative's back here, but Tomlin, do you see anything happening with that March 1 option? Is it just going to be status quo? What do you see?
I think it's just a storyline for the sake of the media making it a storyline. It's the same thing at the end of every season where it's like, maybe this is the year he leaves and takes a TV job. Maybe this is the year the Steelers move on. I mean, I've been listening to a lot of talk radio the last few days, and like on Mad Dog Sports yesterday, Adam Shine was out, and his replacement was all they could talk about, and he just took calls from angry Steelers fans calling in because it drives engagement. You have a huge fan base. You have people that a large portion of the fan base doesn't like Mike Tomlin and wants him out, but this isn't an organization that I think is going to make that move. I think if Tomlin really wanted to leave, I think he would, but I don't know. I don't know if this is really the year that he's gonna want to up and move. One of the biggest things is people say, oh, he can't develop a quarterback. Well, now he has at least next few years to show, hey, maybe he finds a quarterback, maybe he hits on a guy. He's still pretty young. He can still preserve his legacy. I just don't know if now's really the time for him to leave unless he's really just done with the job. So I don't think there's much of a chance at all that Mike Tomlin is done in Pittsburgh after the season, regardless of what happens on Sunday. I mean, if they get smacked on Sunday, the fact that the game's at Acrisure, the crowd is gonna, we're gonna hear the fire Tomlin chants again. But I don't think that's gonna have enough of a sway. I think he's gonna be right back coaching this team next season.
Yeah, people don't want to hear it, but I agree. I mean, if it's another 299 rushing performance and the exact same thing happens, then I think it's worth having a deeper conversation about. I don't think that that's going to be the case in terms of them just getting run all over, especially if Lamar Jackson isn't as mobile as he normally is. I just don't see a path to that for them. But yeah, I mean, just the fact that there is that option is notable. It's worth discussing. It's going to be discussed until March 1 or until they announce that it's been picked up. I don't think they normally do announce that kind of thing. And so, it's probably going to be a type of thing that like Schefter or somebody scoops on if it gets picked up or whatnot. But yeah, I think ultimately Tomlin will be back. I mean, the other curveball there is like if Hayward decides it's time to hang it up, which I don't know why he would. It doesn't seem like he's signaling that from what he said. If both Hayward and Rodgers decide to hang it up, kind of his two buddies he likes to walk off the field with, could he be like, is my heart really in a full rebuild? I guess you could make an argument for that, but I'm going to go ahead and say he'll stay. All right, I think that is all for our topics today. We're going to get into a listener question here. This one from Brett in San Angelo. If you want to have a question answered on a future episode, that number's in the show notes, and I'll read it off now as well. 412-254-3145. Call or text. Leave us a voicemail. Tell us your name, where you're from, and a brief question for a chance to have that answered on a future episode. And while I'm remembering, my grandparents just discovered they can watch us on YouTube, which they were pretty thrilled with. So shout out to my grandparents in Zelienople up there in Pittsburgh. This one from Brett.
Hello, Depot Dive. This is Brett from San Angelo, and I just wanted to get a couple of assessments of seasons. So my question is, who had the better season and why? Najee Harris, 2024, or Kenneth Gainwell, 2025? And the second question is, who had the better season? Dan Moore, 2024, or Fautano, 2025? Just fun exercise, see what your thoughts are. I'll shut up and listen to the answer.
All right. comparing some Steelers this year and last year. Let's start with the easier one. Troy Fautanu or Dan Moore. Dan Moore last year, Troy Fautanu this year. Of course, they play on opposite sides of the line, but which tackle has had the better year, Joe?
I think it's Troy Fautanu. He's ascended, I think, into one of the better right tackles in football. Been pretty consistent all season. I would definitely go with Troy Fautanu.
Yeah, if the Steelers have a good offense in the near future, next year, a couple years down the road from now, Fautanu is going to be a guy who ascends to the profile of being a Pro Bowler, All-Pro type of guy. He's got moves. His footwork's good. He's got that snatch trap. He has everything you want in a tackle and more. I think, Dan Moore, he had a great 2024 season. He got paid for it, but Fautanu is definitely a notch above in my head. The other one's a little more interesting, Najee Harris. I mean, it's kind of comparing apples to oranges in my mind. Najee Harris 2024, Kenneth Gainwell 2025. Kenneth Gainwell being more of a receiver, change of pace, and Najee Harris being more of a workhorse, every down type of guy. Though Gainwell, when they've needed him to be a workhorse, he's been capable. I think this one's a little more interesting, but Joe, what's your answer?
Yeah, I think if you look at the totality of the season, I would go with Kenneth Gainwell. I mean, Najee last year, I mean, he was good, but he had 322 of his 1,043 yards from week 6 to 8. So he kind of had a burst there, and he was okay like earlier in the season and towards the end of the season, but wasn't as consistent of a contributor as I think Gainwell's been throughout the passing game. What he brings to the table with as we talked about the Yazoo package, he hasn't flashed as a returner, but he's returned kicks, and like you said, when he's had to be the lead back, he's done so. He's had over 80 yards in a game 3 times this season on the ground. A couple of games with 7 receptions, couple of games with 6 receptions. So given the totality of the year, I think I would go with Gainwell. But again, I mean, he's not tasked to lead the backfield as Harris was. So a little bit of a tough comparison.
I'll put it this way. If the Steelers had 2024 Najee Harris on their team in 2025 and did not have Gainwell, I think they would be a worse team. Hope that answers your question, Brett. Thank you for calling in as always, and Happy New Year. That's all for our episode today. We will catch you guys next Thursday. Win, loss, or tie. Win or tie being a playoff game, loss being end of the season. Either way, we will be here breaking it all down for you. Thank you guys for a great year of the show and listening and engaging with us. We appreciate it, and we will catch you guys next time.